Oh, good. We got a good crowd already. Awesome. Good to see all of you. All right, cool. My name is Brittany. I am the director of the Educational Advising Program here at OITE. So, welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about filling out secondary applications, right? We're moving along, we're chugging along through this cycle. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do that, I have several of my colleagues with me who I'm just going to ask to introduce themselves. I feel like we haven't done that in a little while. I'm going to go ahead and start with Dr. Hill. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Natasha, Dr. Natasha Hill. You can call me Natasha. I am an educational advisor and the deputy director of the summer program, and we're happy you're all here to learn about tips for filling out those secondary applications. So welcome.
Awesome. Dr. Siebel.
Hi, I'm Gail Siebold, and I'm a scientific skills coach, and I'm also the deputy director of the NIH Graduate Partnership Program.
Thank you, Dr. Siebel. And then I saw Dr. Taborn here too. Where'd you go?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if you can see me, but I'm here. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. John Taborn, and I'm one of the career counselors as well as pre-med advisors and pre-graduate advisors that are here. Some of you, I've met some of you. I will be meeting more as we go through. Happy that you're here. And Brittany, and this workshop's really important. So go ahead and listen to what we have to say, and you can start working on as you start working on your secondaries. And welcome.
Awesome. Okay, so that's the educational advising team, and they're just going to kind of be here listening in. And I think Dr. Hill is going to be in the chat and Q&A answering questions. I do ask that if you do have a question, that you please use the Q&A. All right, cool. As we go ahead and get started here, I'm gonna ask Natasha to put a poll to put the poll up. I just kind of want to see what everyone's applying for, whether you're applying MD, DO, MD, PhD, what else? So go ahead and answer that poll just so you know I can see kind of what people are applying for if you're applying this cycle, or what are you planning on applying for? So go ahead and submit that. Oh, this is cool. Okay, so we see I haven't done a poll in a Teams before, so this is real cool for me. But I see that the majority of you are applying MD. We have a good number of MD, PhD, a good number. Oh, wow, someone is applying DOPA, PhD. Awesome. Okay. Good. Few more responses are coming in. So go ahead and submit your responses. I'm just curious to see where everyone's going to be applying for when they are getting their applications together. Awesome. Okay, cool. So good. So the majority of you are applying to MD. Okay, excellent. Let's go ahead and get into the presentation. Okay, so let's start off with what we're going to be talking about today, right? So I just have a brief outline here. Whoops, hold on. Let me change that. I don't want that. I want this to be little. Okay, there we go. Just the outline of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be going over general advice for, filling out secondaries. How do you prioritize them? Because you're going to be getting a lot of these applications all at once. And there is some strategy into how you want to fill those out to maximize your time and give yourself the highest likelihood of actually receiving an interview. So we'll definitely be talking about that. Then we're going to be going over some different question types, some really common question types that you're really likely to encounter in most of your application. So that's going to include resilience questions, why us, adversity/challenge questions. COVID-19 questions are becoming a lot less common, but I did still see a few schools that had them last year. So we'll definitely be talking about that. And then also in this workshop, we're going to be, going over some real examples that we have of secondary essays from former postbacks, just so you can see the style of writing that is expected of you in these essays. We'll also be talking a little bit about other assessments that you may have to do. So think AAMC Preview or Casper. And then I do want to put this up front is that the educational advising team, so that again, that's myself, Dr. Hill, Dr. Siebold, and Dr. Taborn, we will not review individual secondary applications. So if you make an appointment and you want to review your secondary application from Duke and University of Pittsburgh and University of Maryland and UCLA, I'm going to ask you to cancel the appointment because we just don't have the manpower to review individual secondary applications with everybody. But what we do is that if you have just general prompts or questions, we will review that. So if you want to come in and meet with one of us to brainstorm about secondaries, that's fine. It's just we will not review individual secondary applications. And the link to make an appointment with us is in the presentation. So I'm aware that we have lots of summer students on campus right now. So hello to you if you are a summer student. And if you're a summer student and you're still in college and you're not getting ready to apply just yet, I'm happy that you're here learning about secondaries, but you really should come to the workshop that I'm going to give next week on what you can do in college to enhance your chances getting into medical school. That is really more within your scope. And then again, I have the link there to register if you are interested in that. And then my last plug before we get into the actual content of the workshop today is Fellows Fair. So this is a new initiative that our office is doing. I'm helping organize this event. And this is an event that we're going to have on the campus, the main campus in Bethesda, for all of you. So you can come and meet your fellows committees. So think the post-bac committee, the graduate student council, FELCOM, etc. And you can also meet some other groups on campus. I believe FAES will be there. CREX will be there. Several other groups on campus will be there. And also you can meet some OITE staff. So two of the staff that will be at Fellows Fair are with us today. Dr. Taborn and Dr. Hill will both be at Fellows Fair. So come on July 25th, we will have some snacks, and it's really an opportunity for you all to get to know each other and, network and learn more about the fellows committees and network with each other. Okay. So I have one more thing, again, before we actually, sorry, I misspoke there. I have one more thing that I want to just take a little temperature check on before we get into the rest of the content of this presentation. I want to check in on everyone's wellness, right? So for a lot of you, you've already gone through the rigors of submitting your primary application. Some of you still may be working on refining your application and are going to submit within the next couple days or weeks. A few of you have just gotten your MCAT score back or are going to take it, in the next few weeks or so. And then all the while, you still have to be an NIH, fellow doing your research. You still have to, keep up with your activities throughout the cycle, your clinical volunteering, your community service, et cetera. Oh, and yet you still have to, have a life, right? Doing all of these things simultaneously can be really difficult. So I am metaphorically asking everyone, well, I guess not metaphorically, literally asking everyone, I can't see you, but to take a deep breath with me and let it out. Please remember that applying to medical school is a marathon, not a sprint, right? This is a full academic year that you're going to be in this process, right? So make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Of course, in the OITE, we have some resources for you. You're always welcome to meet with a well-being advisor. You can email that email address if that's something you're interested in doing. And our office has a number of different drop-in groups and other support groups for fellows that are, going through various things. So again, please take care of yourself while you are going through this process. It's really important to maintain your wellness. All right, so now that that's all out of the way, let's actually get to what you all are here for, which is talking about secondaries. So first things first, some general advice, especially for those of you who have already submitted your primary application. It is highly recommended that you pre-write your secondaries as soon as you hit submit for your primary application. Most schools, the secondary prompts do not change too much from year to year. And in general, you can expect to fill out anywhere between 2 and I've seen up to 10 short essays. Now, most of those essays are going to have you write essays around the length between 2 to 500 words, but I have seen prompts that ask for up to 2,000 words that you can write. So if you're applying to, the recommended 25 schools and you multiply that just by 2, so on the lower end, right? Let's say all 25 of your schools only have 2 prompts. That's 50 essays you have to write. So you want to start this process now, especially again for those of you who have submitted your primary already. Now, the earliest date any verified application is going to get sent to the medical schools is June 26th. This is freely available at probation on the AMC website. So why is this relevant? So for those of you who submitted very early, the application opened for submission on May 28th. You may be verified over the next couple weeks. And so you can expect your application to be sent to the medical schools on June 26th, which means you may start getting secondaries from schools as early as June 27th, right? So the earlier you start the pre-writing process, the better off you will be. Now, how do you find these prompts, right? How do you find the prompts that Drexel has or that UCSF has or whatever? This is one of the only times you will ever hear me recommend using forums like Student Doctor Network or Reddit, because people will typically post their secondary prompts from the previous cycle, and you can use that as a means to start pre-writing. Again, most schools don't change their prompts too dramatically from year to year, so this is where I would recommend for Reddit, forums like Reddit or Student Doctor Network only to look for secondary prompts and not much else. So like I just mentioned, when will you get your secondaries? Again, many medical schools will automatically send it as soon as they receive your verified application, which again is going to be the earliest of June 26th. So if you have someone tell you that, oh, my application has been sent to the medical schools already, and it's not June 26th, that is not accurate information, okay? So that is the earliest anyone's verified application is going to get sent to the medical schools. So again, most schools, as soon as your application is verified and they have received it, you will get a secondary. So again, that can be as early as June 27th. And then here on the in the slides, if you click on this link, it will take you to the secondary policies of the AMC has on their website. So it'll take you to those secondary policies so you can look school by school by school. So again, like I said, most schools in the US and Canada do not screen. Everybody that submits a verified application will get a secondary. Now, there are some schools that do screen, right? Some schools have minimum requirements, whether that's MCAT or GPA or number of non-clinical community service hours. Some schools screen differently, whether you're in-state or out-of-state. So a good example of this is LSU. They have different screening requirements for in-state students from Louisiana than out-of-state students from other states, right? You can see some of this information in, again, the AAMC secondary policies. Again, I have that linked here. So if you just click on it, it'll take you directly to the policies. And you can see which schools are going to be screening their applicants. And you can expect a little bit of a delay from when you're getting your secondary from schools that send them to everybody. So here are just some examples of schools that do screen. I picked some popular choices that people tend to apply to. So a lot of people like to apply to the University of California schools, and they do screen, right? University of Central Florida, another big state school, they also screen. I already mentioned LSU, right? They screen specifically for students that are out of state. Emory is another school. I believe they say it in the secondary policies, they screen on your MCAT score. So again, you have all of this information up front. And the reason why I think it's important to look through this is that this way you're not surprised, right? You're not surprised. Why did you get a secondary from University of Maryland, but you haven't gotten one from Emory? It's because UMD does not screen, but Emory does. It helps take the stress off and makes you more prepared. So make sure when you have your list of schools, add a column for the school's secondary policies. Now, if you don't see it on the link that I have hyperlink there, if you don't see it there in the AMC policies, go to the school's individual website and see if you can find that information there, because not all schools relay their secondary policies directly to the AAMC through MSAR. So again, make sure you're keeping note of schools that screen versus schools that do not. So again, more general advice, right? So ideally, once you start getting your secondaries in, again, at the very earliest is going to be the last week of June, right? Ideally, you want to submit your secondary essays within about 2 weeks, right? Now, some schools are going to give you a firm deadline. Like, we want the secondaries submitted by July 14th. Or some schools are going to say, we want your secondary submitted at exactly 2 weeks before, exactly 2 weeks after you have received them, right? So some schools do give those for firm deadlines. Most schools do not, right? They do not give you a firm deadline of like, you need to have it in 2 weeks. Usually the deadline is sometime in October, and I've seen as late as January, you can submit your secondaries. But the ideal timeline, again, unless they gave you a firm deadline, is within about 2 weeks, right? So what does that within about 2 weeks mean? That does not mean that if I submit my secondary or you submit your secondaries at 18 days, you're not going to be reviewed for that school. I promise you it's not that stringent unless they gave you a firm deadline. So just generally somewhere between 14 to 18 days is a good range to be in for your secondaries. And again, the advice that we always give, you want to send the strongest essays as early as possible. So if earliest with the strongest essays is 3 days because you pre-wrote, that's fantastic. But if you're going to have better written essays, better quality essays by waiting 18 days, I promise you it is worth waiting those 18 days. So again, strongest essays as early as possible. So now when we think about, organizing your secondaries in the order that you should fill them out, again, if you're going by applying to the recommended to 20 to 25 schools, and if 20 of those schools do not screen, you're going to get 20 secondary applications in your inbox within about 2 to 3 days. And that's pretty overwhelming, right? So how do you prioritize what applications to start first versus the ones that you may put off for just a little bit? So again, you want to first start off with any school that gives you a firm deadline. Those schools have to come first, right? Because you want to make that priority deadline that the schools set. The next set of schools that you want to work on are your target schools, right? So what's a target school? Target schools are schools where, based off of your application, including your experiences, the mission statement of the school, and your stats, so think MCAT, GPA, and AMC preview, for example, that you feel like you have a good shot of getting the interview. So for example, if you have around 300 hours of non-clinical community service, an MCAT of a 515, and a GPA of a 3.8, right? Then Georgetown may be a target school for you, right? Or if you have a lot of experience with a Spanish-speaking population, lots of research experience, University of Miami may be a target school for you, right? So we won't know that because we haven't seen all of your applications, but right? So those are the schools that you want to complete next, your target schools. And that's also for many of you going to include your state school. So for those of you from North Carolina, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill has a very heavy in-state preference for people from North Carolina. So that would be a target school for you. And you want to prioritize filling that out, filling that secondary out, right? So after you have, prioritized the schools that give you the firm deadline, then you moved on to your target schools. Again, the schools you feel like you have a really good shot at getting an interview. The last group of schools that you're going to prioritize is those dream or read schools. Now, this is difficult to define because a dream or read school is going to mean different things to different people, right? So only you are going to know what a dream or read school is to you. But those schools are going to come last in your prioritization. So again, schools with a firm deadline, schools that you feel like you have a really good shot at getting an interview at, your target schools. And then last are going to be those dream/read schools. Again, that definition is going to be different depending on a lot of different factors for all of you. So there's actually a lot harder to define than what we typically think. Make sure that you're checking your email regularly and your chat and your spam folders. And also, please do not use your NIH email for any portion of your application. In the past, we have had fellows have a secondary prompt or secondary application or an interview invitation get caught up in the NIH firewall. You don't obviously want that to happen. So please make sure you're using your personal email address. I'm also wary about people using their email addresses from their undergrad institution, because sometimes if you've been gone from your undergrad institution for 2 years, you suddenly lose access to that email and they don't give you a warning. So ideally use your personal email address for your application. Okay. And other general advice about secondaries, this is your time to talk about things that you didn't get to mention on your primary application, right? Now, in your primary application, you only, at least for the AMCAS, right? It's a little bit different for DO and the Texas schools. But on the AMCAS, you only get 15 experiences that you can talk about on your application, right? In the initial primary. And then some of you have additional experiences that you wanted to talk about on your primary, but you just didn't have space. This is where your secondaries it comes in. So changes in clinical experience or community service or leadership, new experiences that you've gotten since submitting your primary application are some of the things that you're going to be talking about in your secondaries. New extenuating circumstances. If you've had a death in the family, recently had a health issue, lost a job, whatever it is, these should be things that were not on your primary application. They should be new things that you're going to talk about in your secondaries. And just to drive this point home a little bit further about, it's really important to, submit your secondaries. The earlier, the better. Again, strongest essays as early as you can. Here is some data from Student Doctor Network. They compiled interview invitations. This is for MD, PhD programs, right? And we can see that the majority of invitations for MD, PhD applications really shot up in August, right? And then peaked in September, right? So that means these individuals that received interviews in August and September most likely had their secondary submitted sometime in mid-July. So again, the earlier you send those strong essays, the better off you'll be. So pre-write. So moving on to content tips, right? Again, we'll show some examples about some essays we've collected from former postdocs a little bit later. But in general, what is the type of content that you want to be talking about in your secondary applications? Well, for this, I'm going to encourage you to look towards the AAMC core competencies. Many schools use the core competencies as a rubric to evaluate your application. This includes your primary and your secondary. Here I have listed out a few of the core competencies in the professional category, cultural awareness, empathy and compassion, in the science category, human behavior, limits, living systems, and in the thinking and reasoning category, critical thinking and scientific inquiry. The idea is that throughout your application, including your secondaries, you are demonstrating these core competencies in several ways. So once you have all your essays written how you like, you're going to make a little comment to yourself in the essay and ask yourself, which core competencies am I addressing in this essay, right? And again, the idea is that you address all of them throughout your application. So here we have a quote from a student from JHU that went on to JHU. I can help students understand how I fit with what the medical school values are by emphasizing the aspects of my experience that best illustrate how my values, passions, and goals overlap with those of each individual school. So again, this is a student who went on to Johns Hopkins, and essentially they're saying that in their secondary application, this is an opportunity for them to show, one, how the school is a good fit for them, but two, how they're a good fit for the school, touching on those core competencies in their content in their secondary applications. So again, your primary application is really meant to show that you are competitive and you have explored the profession of being a physician. Your secondaries are really meant for making the argument that you are going to be a good fit within the mission scope of George Washington or Rush or Northwestern, whatever school it is. That is the primary goal of your secondaries. So some more general advice, a question that we get all the time is, can you use the same experiences that you've talked about in other portions of your application in your secondaries? The short answer to this is yes. If you talked about clinical volunteering in your personal statement, you can absolutely talk about it again in your secondaries. If you talked about shadowing in your working activities, you can absolutely talk about it again in your secondaries. The idea is that you can talk about the same experiences, but you really need to talk about them in a different way. So pick a different day that you spent shadowing. Pick a different, day that you volunteered at a food bank. Pick a different client you worked with at the nursing home, right? So you can absolutely talk about the same experience. You just need to do it in different ways. Please do not paraphrase from document to document to document. That is much more obvious than I think applicants think it is. So again, same experience, but talk about it in a different way. And when we're talking about these experiences, I just have some advice from a former educational advisor in our office, Dr. Bill Higgins. And, he sat on several different admissions committees for medical school. His advice was, when you're talking about these experiences, you want to spend minimum characters talking about what you did, but maximum characters about how it made you grow professionally or personally and how it's going to make you a better physician. So keep that in mind when you are writing the content in your essays. Again, minimum characters about what you did, maximum characters about how it helped you navigate through something, how it helped you grow personally, professionally, academically. How is it going to make you a better physician or medical student? Right? More general advice here, and I know this seems really obvious, but I bolded this for a reason, is that the primary thing when you are addressing your secondaries and writing the content is that you want to make sure you are directly answering the prompt. Many of these secondary essays have multiple questions in the prompt, and then sometimes when I read through examples from people, they're only addressing one question in the prompt, and then the other two are ignored. No, you need to make sure that you're answering the prompt directly. And you do this by doing your research, giving specific examples that match the school's mission statement, right? Talking about specific things, right, that are going to directly address the prompt. So, for example, that why us prompt that is really common in most secondary applications that we'll talk about, you may talk about a specific course or student group, outreach efforts, facilities, whatever it is. You want to make sure you're giving specific examples that directly address the prompt. All right. So I know we're in 2026, so I did have to update this slide. A couple years ago, I would have told you, do not use AI or chatbots to write your application, right? Well, like anything in science and technology, things have evolved. So the general advice has gone from absolutely do not use AI in your application at all to make sure if you do choose to use AI, you do it wisely and responsibly. Okay. So I would still caution people against using AI or chatbots to write full portions of your application. So generative AI. I still largely advise against that because your answers tend to be, the responses tend to be very vague, very generic. It's like 500 words of nothing, basically, if that makes any sense. And I have read prompts that people wrote with, like Gemini or Claude or whatever, and it's just 500 words of nothing, basically, right? But where AI is a very powerful tool, and where I do, where the AAMC does encourage people to use it, is generating ideas, editing, condensing. This is where AI and using chatbots is going to be really, really, really powerful. And the AAMC does recommend that you use it for those purposes. So again, no generative AI, right? But generating ideas, refining your story, editing and condensing your prompts, absolutely. And here is a link to, you can see what the AAMC recommends when it comes to using chatbots and AIs in your medical school application. All right. So now we're going to move on to actually talking about the questions that you're going to run into when filling out your secondary essays, and then looking at some examples of how former postbacks have addressed these different types of questions. So what are typical secondary type of questions that you're going to see in an application? Generally, they're going to be broken down into two different categories. The first are these hyper-specific questions that relate to something to the school or something like within the scope of medicine. So something really, really specific. So let's take this example from University of Pittsburgh from their secondaries last year. Respect for others of different backgrounds is integral to the successful practice of medicine, as is understanding the social determinants of health. Describe a situation you observe between a patient and a healthcare system that illustrates the impacts of social determinants of health or the delivery of care. Describe what you learned from this situation, right? So again, look at the prompt. Look at what they're asking. They're asking you, first of all, to describe a situation you observed between a patient and a healthcare system, right? But they're also asking you to talk about what you learned from the situation. So this is one of those things where you need to make sure you're reading the prompt and addressing the full thing, not just describing the interaction, but making sure you're reserving a good number of your characters or words for what you learned from the situation. So again, this is very specific to the social determinants of health. So for these type of prompts, right, it is going to be a little bit more difficult to pre-write because this type of question may only be present on the University of Pittsburgh secondary application, right? Where pre-writing can definitely be powerful are these more general prompts. So this one from Drexel, and this prompt from Drexel, I have checked, has not changed in the last like 5 years. So here they ask, please discuss all your current and recent activities and engagement that have prepared you for medical school. Please be sure to include any traditional or non-traditional clinical exposures and volunteering experiences that you have done. So most schools are going to ask some sort of question like this, where they're going to ask you to further expand on your clinical or non-clinical experiences. So this is the type of prompt where, again, pre-writing can be very powerful, where you have a prompt ready to go, and then all you have to do is change the length, right? So this is where pre-writing can be super powerful. So you could expect questions like this on the majority of your secondary essays. So another type of question, again, that we typically see on a lot of schools' secondary applications is asking about your personal background or your lived experiences. So an example of this is from Stanford, right? They're literally giving you an example of what to write in your secondary application. Describe in a short paragraph your family's educational and family background. So the example that they gave is, I grew up in New York City as a third child of a supermarket cashier and a high school principal. I attended Man High School, where my major interests were boxing and drama, right? So you'll write something similar. But for prompts like this, in addition to talk about your lived experiences, right? That's important. You also want to make sure you reserve some of the characters to talk about how your lived experiences have kind of shaped your path to becoming a physician, how it shaped what type of care you're going to provide your patients in the future. Make sure you reserve some of your characters for that type of content in these personal background lived experiences essay. And then often what they're trying to get at in these personal background lived experiences essays is your ability to understand cultural competency or demonstrate cultural competency. That's sometimes one of the things they're trying to understand in those lived experiences essays. Have you worked or lived around people that are from a different background than you? Were you in student groups for people that, you know, were of a different background or race or ethnicity or religion or whatever? So those are some of the things that they're trying to get out of those lived experiences essays. So you do want to try to demonstrate that cultural competency. And cultural competency, of course, is one of the AAMC core competencies as well, right? So when we think about what cultural competency is, it's basically your ability to understand other cultures, right? Not necessarily all the nuances of another culture, but to understand that we all have different lived experiences and they're important. So you need to demonstrate this in your applications, especially in those lived experiences, personal background essays. So moving on to probably the most important question in your secondary application, which is the why us? Now, many schools are going to ask you this question outright. They're going to ask, why do you want to go to Ohio State? But some schools do not explicitly ask you this why us question. And so I'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, if a school asks you outright why you want to attend Ohio State, this is a very important question because you need to clearly lay out why you need to complete your medical school training at Ohio State. What can you get from Ohio State that you're not going to be able to get at another school, right? So here's an example of what this prompt looks like. Right, so this is their mission statement. The Ohio State University College of Medicine is to improve people's lives through innovation and research, medical aid, and patient care. Please describe how your past experiences predict your potential to contribute to 2 of these 3 areas, right? So they're giving you your mission statement. They're giving you an opportunity to talk about your past experiences and how they fit within the mission statement. Remember, I said that at the beginning of the presentation. So this is your opportunity to make that argument of why Ohio State? Why are you a good fit for Ohio State? Why is your experience volunteering at a free clinic going to make you provide better patient care at Ohio State? Why did that motivate you to want to join the student-run free clinic there? That's what we mean in terms of making the case that you are a good fit for the school and the school is a good fit for you. Okay, so I think I'm going to skip this for now. Yeah, I'm going to skip this one for now because we talked about this a bit. I want to get on to the tips, and so you all can see some examples of what this actually looks like. So again, some additional more why us tips. Don't only use the weather or the fact that your support system is in the area. You will be surprised. I've read many prompts where people are only talking about the great weather in UCSD in San Diego, or the fact that their boyfriend is going to be doing a PhD at Cornell, and it's just nice that they'll be somewhat close to each other, right? So you don't only want to rely on that. That's important, but it shouldn't take up the majority of your essay. Don't just restate the mission statement, the program, the resources and offerings, right? The idea is that if you're going to mention the mission statement, the offerings of the school, you're going to show how the experiences that you previously had fit within those offerings or fit within that mission statement. Don't just restate the mission statement, okay? Talk about how your experiences fit within it. You do want to highlight the unique aspects of their curriculum, specific programs, research hospital affiliations, etc. So for example, some of you that may be applying to Duke, Duke has a leadership and palliative care program, right? That's specific to Duke. If you're interested in that, make sure you mention it in your secondary applications. University of Pittsburgh has a strong affiliation with the University of with the hospital system there. So does University of Pennsylvania. They have a strong association with the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. You can do many of your rotations and clerkships there. If that's something that you're interested in, make sure that you mention it, right? Georgetown has a very well-known student-run free clinic called the Hoya Clinic, where they serve, patients in Ward 8 and 7 of DC. That's one of their primary missions of the school. If that's something that's important to you, you want to make sure you mention it. You want to make sure you mention how you have supported people that are underserved in medicine and how that's made you want to volunteer at the Hoya Clinic when you're a student there. Right? So again, focus on how your experiences fit within the school, what you can bring to the school, right? And what they offer to you that you're going to find the most beneficial and support your future interest. Right? And this is where some of this information, the things that I just mentioned, some of this information can be difficult to find. Your first bet is you're going to go and do a deep dive on the school's website. But if you're not finding some of the specific offering or resources there, this is where you may want to consider contacting current students or alumni. You also want to think about going to the open houses. So the ANC virtual fair just passed on June 3rd and 4th. So if you weren't able to go to that, many schools will do an open house for applicants in the spring and summer. And that's where you can ask current students about these really specific offerings for the schools that you can use in your secondary essays. So I strongly recommend that you go to those open houses throughout the cycle. The next type of question that we're going to talk about here is that adversity challenge question. Sometimes these are called resilience essays as well. But generally, the school is trying to understand if you've been through some sort of adversity or challenging situation in your life, right? How have you navigated through it? Now, sometimes I hear from applicants, well, I've never been through an adverse situation in my life, right? And the idea is that not necessarily the adverse situation that you're talking about is something that's super dramatic, but it's a challenge that you've actually worked through. So just some examples that I've heard over the years of what people talk about in these prompts. I've heard everything from I got a concussion the day before I took my MCAT, to I acted as a primary caregiver for my father during college, to I had to flee an area of conflict in the world, to, I had an issue in lab with my direct supervisor. Those are different levels of adversity, but they all fit within the scope of these prompts. Okay. So don't feel like, if you don't have a super compelling or super serious adverse situation that you've been to, that you won't have anything to write for these prompts. You will. You just have to think about any sort of challenging situation that you may have encountered throughout your life and thoughtfully talk about it in your essay. Okay, so again, these can include moral or ethical dilemmas. And the most important part of these adversity or challenge questions is what you did to navigate through the situation. The least important part is the actual situation itself. So the getting the concussion the day before your MCAT, the getting the C in biochemistry because you had to work. That's the least important part of the prompt. The most important part is how you navigated through it. I started going to office hours. I changed my study habits, right? I did better with my time management. Whatever it is, that's the important part of the prompt. And that's what you want to spend the majority of your characters on when you're writing this in your secondaries. Right? So again, these questions are increasingly common, and they have replaced those previous diversity prompts. A few schools do still have diversity prompts, but many schools are instead asking about resilience and adversity instead. So you may see a mix of both of those throughout your applications. So here's just an example from Johns Hopkins of briefly describing a situation where you had to overcome adversity, include lessons you learned and how you think it will affect your career as a physician. So again, in this type of prompt, the actual overcoming the adversity or the adversity itself is the least important part of the question. The most important part of the prompt is the lessons you learned and how is it going to make you a better physician or medical student in the future. Right? So again, hopefully I've made this clear, is that the actual topic of the adverse situation is less important than what you did after, right? You want to make sure that you talk about the specific action steps that you took to navigate through that situation. You want to talk about the reflection that you did. How did you grow in that situation, right? How is it going to make you a better physician or a better medical student? So those are just some of the general question types that you're going to see throughout your application. Through your secondary application. So again, pre-write, especially for those more general prompts. Okay, so now let's take some time and look at some real examples of secondary prompts that postbacs have donated to me over the years. So 2 things. I'm going to ask everyone to read the prompt and then provide some feedback. Do you feel like they addressed the prompt? Do you feel like they incorporated, some of the AAMC core competencies? So I'm going to ask for feedback in the chat. So 2 things. Again, these are real people that donated these essays to us. So any feedback that you give, please be respectful and constructive with your criticism. And then also, I'm going to do this. This is totally the honor system here, y'all. But please no screenshots of these essays. Again, we're working on the honor system here, so I trust y'all. So let's go ahead and again, look at a real example of what, the style of writing you may do in your secondaries. Okay, so let's take this example from Wake Forest. So challenge question like we've talked about. Describe a non-academic challenge you have faced and explain how you overcame it. So if everyone could just, take a few minutes to actually read the prompt and then put in the chat whether or not you think this person addressed the prompt directly. Put in the chat, do you feel like they addressed multiple core competencies, or what core competencies do you feel like they addressed in answering this prompt? Okay, so let me see if I can get the chat up so I can see it. Okay, so go ahead, take a minute to read this, and then let me see if I can go ahead and see the chat. Okay, I got it up. Awesome. Okay, so what do y'all think of this? What do y'all think of this prompt? Again, take a few seconds, take a few minutes to read it, and then put in the chat whether or not you feel like they addressed the prompt, what they could have done to improve, what you like about the prompt, what core competencies do you feel like they addressed here? Okay, so what do y'all think? Go ahead and put your responses in the chat. Okay, we have some comments coming in. I like how they connected it with treating patients with empathy as a physician in the future. Okay, more feedback. Okay, from it probably could have had more about their takeaways and less about the disease itself. Okay, thank you. More feedback from anyone? Saying things like I took matters into my own hand may not be needed. It's a good point, Maya. You don't get many characters or words sometimes in these prompts. I've seen as little as 50 words in some of these secondary essays. So you want to use your characters and words wisely. Okay. Any other feedback? Okay, they did a good job of talking about how they managed the problem and what they learned from it. A couple people said the sentence structure could have been more concise. All right. Any other feedback here? What core competencies do you feel like they're addressing here? It could have honed a final message more than talking about different outcomes. Someone said, okay, Angel said it showed resilience and adaptability and commitment to growth. Yep, those are two of the core competencies. I see adaptability. Okay. What about scientific inquiry and understanding, living systems? I think this essay did a decent job of demonstrating that within that own person. I think they did a decent job of, demonstrating that they have an understanding of them as a living system. Okay. All right, good. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next prompt here. Okay, so here we have a prompt from Columbia. This is one of the diversity slash, sometimes this has been rebranded as resilience. So this prompt is Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons values diversity in all of its forms. How will your experience contribute to this important focus on our institution and inform your future role as a physician? So again, same question. Read the prompt, put in the chat, what you think they did well, what you think maybe they could have improved. And from there. Yeah, go ahead and put that in the prompt, in the chat. So yeah, I'm gonna work on removing these. Work on removing these examples in the recording before I send it to you. But you will get the recording. Thank you for the question. So again, what do y'all think of this? What they did well? What do you think they could improve on? Do you think they were addressing the prompt here? What core competencies did they demonstrate? Okay. I like how they connected their personal experiences and how it drives their motivation. Anything else? Mature and thoughtful. Okay. It doesn't really explain why Columbia. All right, but you have to look at the prompt. Remember, look what the prompt is actually, asking there, right? It would have been nice to see a specific anecdote to back up the claims, okay? It could be more specific to the Columbia, okay? So again, same comment someone else gave, make sure you're looking at that prompt, okay? Any other feedback here? Feel like it could have been less focused on her story and more how it relates to Columbia. It does a good job of expressing her familiarity would not be represented in this in medicine without blaming the system. Craig, that's an important point. That's a very important point that Craig just brought up there, right? Is that it's there people have all sorts of lived experiences, right, within healthcare, right? But in general, the tone of your essays should be fairly positive, right? So you do have to, make sure that you are talking about your lived experience, but ideally not in a overly negative way. So very good point. Thank you, Craig. Okay, awesome. All right, so I have a couple more examples that we're going to take a look at here. All right, so here's another example from Wake Forest, a very popular school that a lot of our fellows like to apply to. So this one is, tell us any specific reasons why you see yourself at Wake Forest. So this is the traditional why this school. So take a read of this one and tell me how you think they did. You think they really made the case for why Wake Forest? How do their experiences fit into Wake Forest? Yeah, go ahead and give it a read and then put your response in the chat. All right, again, one of the most important questions you're going to run across in your secondaries is the why this school. So this one you really need to take your time on. So what do y'all think of this one? Do you think this person made a good case of why Wake Forest? What core competencies do you feel like they addressed here? What do you think they could have improved, or what did you like about it? Mm-hmm. Okay. The ending was a little abrupt unless it was cut off. Okay, yeah, okay, it wasn't cut off. Okay, but you felt like the ending was a little abrupt. Okay. Is it better to list multiple reasons like this, or to better have two main reasons and elaborate them on more deeply? That's a good question. I think it really depends on the individual school, right? If a school does have multiple things that you're interested in, you may, list that offering and then maybe give one sentence about why you're interested in it or how one of your experiences have motivated you to fit in it. But for schools that where you only get a few characters, I would only pick like two reasons if you don't get very many characters or words to talk about something. Good question. What about everyone else? What do y'all think of this prompt? Okay. I like this essay. I believe it does a good job of connecting the mission of the school to their personal experience. Their passions align and are not only spoken about, but shown through lived experiences. Okay, thank you, Sandra. Okay, so I like how she mentioned the specific doctor, but will we have to have the contact the doctor beforehand to make sure that we could work with her? Oh, Maya, this is a good question. No, right? Your secondaries isn't a contract, right? It's not a contract. If there's someone that you're interested in working there, you don't have to have a personal relationship with them in order to mention them in your secondaries, right? It's just ideas. It's just things that you're interested in. So no, you don't have to reach out to that doctor beforehand. And quite frankly, many schools forbid you reaching out to anyone at the school except for the central admissions email address. Just because schools get so many emails, many schools just say, nope, we have one email address. And if we think your email needs to be rerouted to a person, we'll reroute it for you. So good question, Maya. What about anyone else? What do y'all think of this one? Why this school? You could just mention someone research that you find interesting? Yes, you can. What are the chances that a reviewer might reach out to ask you that? So if you're talking about an interview, anything that you put in your application is fair game to ask in an interview. So if you put it in your secondaries, you need to be prepared to talk about it in an interview. So I can't give you the specific chances, but anything in your application, you need to be prepared to talk about. Any other thoughts or comments on this one? All right, good. All right, looks like we don't have any more comments here. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to this last prompt. So this one is for Georgetown. Now, this is one of my favorite secondary prompts because this is the one where people sometimes are like, well, I don't have anything else to say. Do I fill it out, right? So you'll typically see some type of prompt like this on your secondaries. And if you don't have anything else that you would like to add, right? If you truly can't think of anything else, then you would put, I feel like I have been well represented in the rest of my essay, and I do not have anything to add further at this time. But only put that if you truly do not feel like you have anything else you would like the admissions committee to talk about or to know. So go ahead and give this prompt a read and or this essay a read. What do you all think about it again? Like what are your thoughts, right? Do you feel like they are talking about this situation in a compelling way? Let me know what you think. What core competencies are they addressing here? All right, what do y'all think of this prompt or this response? I think it is a good way to explain external factors that affected their stats and definitely shows resilience. I agree. The student was very resilient. The student was very, very, very resilient. So, anyone else? What did y'all think of this one? So what if your school didn't have a why blank question? Should you prioritize talking about this topic in this type of box or treat it like other impactful experiences essay? So again, this is something that this person most likely did not talk about in any other place in their application. So if you already talked about, a similar situation in your other impactful experiences essay, you don't need to talk about it again on your secondary essay unless there's something new you want to add to the story, right? You don't necessarily need to talk about it again. Other thoughts on this? what other core competencies do you feel like they were addressed in this essay? Again, resilience is one of them. What are some other ones you think they addressed? Any other comments before we move on? All right, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, good. So I hope you all can see the style of writing that you want to be thinking about when you are preparing your secondary essays. This is a lot of writing. This takes time. So pre-writing is your best thing that you can do in order to prepare yourself to try to have these in within around a 2 to 18-day turnaround. Okay, so the one question type that I didn't show was the COVID-19 questions. And that's just because these are becoming a lot less common on applications. But last year, I did see a few applications that did have them. So these are the prompts from AACOMAS. So those of you who are going to be applying DO, this is the application that you'll be using. So here they said, please describe, how COVID-19 has impacted your pathway to medical school. Did it impact it academically, professionally, or personally, right? So if you do get asked about a COVID type question, again, these are becoming a lot less common. Make sure that you just don't talk about the pandemic itself, but more about, again, how it impacted you academically, professionally, or personally, or all three of them. And if you feel like the COVID-19 pandemic didn't impact you that much, right, then you would write about that, right, about how what you did do throughout the pandemic to help yourself, right, if you feel like you yourself weren't directly super impacted. Okay, but again, these questions are becoming a lot less common. Okay, some other tips for answering COVID-19 questions. Again, no excuses, no blaming, no complaining. We all went through it, right? So you want to avoid doing the blame game. Think about how you did choose to spend your time during the pandemic. So I know a number of you got clinical jobs during the pandemic, or started a blog, or were volunteering doing COVID testing, or whatever it is that you did during the pandemic. You want to spend the majority of your time talking about, the things that you did do to cope and get through it. Right? Again, how did it affect you personally? Would you learn about medicine or the healthcare system? I know one thing that I learned about medicine and the healthcare system during the COVID-19 pandemic was how deeply seated medical mistrust is in many communities, right? That's something that I learned. Maybe you all could talk about that in your secondary prompts. How did it change your perspective on medicine? And do you foresee COVID affecting your future? Another type of question that sometimes we see on secondary prompts are questions about research. I want to make sure this is clear. This is not the same thing as your significant research essay for those of you applying MD, PhD. That you get 10,000 characters. It's submitted with your primary application. This is something different. This is when some schools ask you to briefly touch on your research experiences, and several schools that require you to do research, like Northwestern, for example, require you to do research. They have a question about research on your secondary applications. So here's just an example of what this looks like. You want to be able to briefly describe your hypothesis or central question, talk briefly about the methods that you used. The majority of your characters are going to be spent on the results and how you interpreted those results, and of course, what your research means for the medicine or moving forward. Additionally, you may share, why you were motivated to do the research at all, and reflect on how the experience affected you, right? How do you feel like you grew as a researcher? How do you feel like you learned about research advancing medicine? Again, these are all things that you want to put into those research essays. So somewhat similar to what you may have put in your working activities if you chose to talk about research in your working activity section. So other type of questions that I've seen on secondary applications over the years are, if you were working on a small group project and you thought another student wasn't carrying their load, how would you handle it? This is one of those behavioral questions where the school is trying to get an idea of how you interact with other people, right? So I've seen secondaries have questions like this. Briefly describe your exposure to medicine. So again, what are those broad, really general questions where you're going to be talking about your clinical experiences? A question that I see sometimes on essays that I think people sometimes struggle with, surprisingly enough, is what do you think you will like best about being a physician? Please don't say the pay or the prestige, which I know are, hey, we're transparent here. I know those are important parts of being a physician, are the great pay and the prestige. But for these, think about, impacting the lives of your patient, improving their health, being a leader in your community, right? I think sometimes people struggle a little bit with these questions. Also, the second one, right? What do you think you will like least about being a physician? Now, this one can be tricky because, like I mentioned earlier, you want to generally keep the tone of your responses positive, and you don't want to be overly critical of medicine, right? You all want to be practicing physicians, so you don't want to be overly critical of a profession that you ultimately want to be about. So with this one, you can briefly mention, what do you think you're going to like least about being a physician? So let's just say prior authorizations, right? Dealing with insurance companies. But make sure you reserve some of your work or your characters on how you're going to be a solution to that problem, or what type of solution do you envision to that problem. Another question I've seen over the years is describe yourself and your medical career as you see yourself 10 years from now. This one's a fun one. So you're going to think about yourself 10 years post-residency, and what will you be doing? Will you be running your own practice? Will you be, doing clinical trials? Will you be at a big research hospital or children's hospital? I think that one's a really fun one to answer. Okay, so as we get towards the end of the presentation here, again, the biggest thing that you hopefully could take away from this presentation is staying organized, trying to prioritize your secondaries, right? Again, start with schools that give you a firm deadline, then move on to your target schools, and then leave your dream or reach schools for the end. Make sure you're staying organized. Google Sheets, Numbers, Excel, whatever platform you like. I'm sure there's a ton of different AI tools that'll help you stay organized as well. Make sure you include this type of information: school name, location, how much it costs, if they screened, I talked about that earlier, when you submitted it, the day you hit submit. You also may want to include the school's mission statement in this Excel file, so you can make sure that whatever you're writing is fitting within the mission of that school. So make sure you stay organized. So again, what are your next steps here? Right? So again, nobody's application has been sent to the medical schools. That will not happen until June 26th. So what can you be doing now if you've already submitted your primary application? You're going to pre-write, right? Based off of previous years, like we discussed earlier, right? You're going to continue to check your email. Remember, personal email addresses only. No NIH, and I would be really cautious about using your email address from your undergraduate institution if you did. Just make sure you keep up with that. Be prepared to receive, so I haven't touched on this yet, but be prepared to receive secondaries even if you didn't take the MCAT. Because remember, your application can be verified without your MCAT score. So I know some of you I'm working with are in the room, I see your names, are not taking the MCAT until the end of June. Right? So you're not going to have your MCAT score by the time secondaries come out, or your application may be verified, but you still may receive secondaries. So you may have to balance finish studying for the MCAT and starting to write your essay. So again, pre-write, right? Again, I already mentioned this, due to the number of fellows, we just can't offer, we just can't review individual secondaries. We just don't have the capacity to do that. But if you want to meet with us about, like a brainstorming or just general questions, we're happy to do that. Okay. So other assessments that you may have taken already, if not, you may be taking these. So these are just a couple. So Casper, many of the Texas schools require this. Snapshot, Duet, AAMC previews. All of these are broadly categorized under situational judgment tests, where in general, there are differences between all of these, but in general, the point of these is trying to see how you respond to different ethical or moral dilemmas. Again, there's differences between Casper and Preview, etc., but that's the general idea, is how do you respond to these ethical or moral dilemmas? All right. How do you prepare for that? We have a couple of books in our office. One of them is Medical Ethics by Tony Hope. We have that. And then we have the Multiple Mini Interviews book. We actually have an updated version of this. It's this is the updated version. It's this green one here by Samir Desai. And if you do want to check this out, just make sure you get the updated version, because this one includes topics on the COVID-19 pandemic. And these are really helpful, not only for secondary prompts and your situational judgment tests, they're also really important for your interviews, especially if your interviews have MMIs as a part of the interview process. Okay, so that is it from here. We will take any final questions. So if you do have questions that you want to reach out to me directly, my email is there. I also have the link to just some of the resources that we have on our website for pre-med fellows. And then you're more than welcome to make an appointment with an educational advisor. So again, that is myself, Dr. Hill, or Dr. Taborn. We will be happy to meet with you. And our next Q&A is going to be this Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Dr. Hill and Dr. Taborn will be there, and they will be taking your questions on anything related to applying to medical school, secondaries, personal statements, whatever your questions is, Dr. Taborn or Dr. Hill will be happy to answer them for you. So that is all I got for today. I'm sure Natasha was answering questions in the chat, but are there any other additional questions that you think we should go on over, Dr. Hill?
Sorry about that. Needed to unmute. No, I don't think there's any additional questions. There were a few in the chat, but if anybody has a lingering question that they want to unmute themselves and ask real quick, please go ahead.
Okay,
There's
hold on.
one in the chat.
Okay, sorry, I got my tab now. Okay.
Are there any
all
good
right.
references you guys know of to look at how other matriculants may have answered a specific school's secondary essays?
I mean, that one's hard, Maya. But, people will post on Reddit and Student Doctor Network. It's just hard. It's hard with those type of forums because you don't know what's real and what's not real. People could just make stuff up. So instead of looking at how people have answered secondary prompts before, you just want to make sure that you are answering the prompt and that you're addressing the core competencies in your responses. So that's what I will focus on rather than looking at how other people have answered them.
And then another question, what are the best schools for interdisciplinary research as an MD PhD?
So that's gonna be tough to answer because interdisciplinary is gonna mean different things to different people. Right? Interdisciplinary can mean a program that does neuroscience from both a behavioral and cell and molecular biology standpoint. That could be interdisciplinary. Or that can mean a school that has microbiology and cancer biology programs. So that's actually a really difficult question for us to answer. So what I would say is that you want to, just look at all the schools that have MD PhD programs and make sure that each of the schools that you're looking at has at least 3 to 5 labs that you would be happy to join if you were a student there, rather than thinking about the best school for interdisciplinary research, because that's actually pretty tough to answer. Awesome. Any other questions before we let y'all all go? Okay. Another question. For each specific school, look for programs schools may offer in the mission statement. Is that it? Yeah, so programs that they offer, specific courses, classes, right? Student groups. Of course, look at their mission statement. All of those are things you're gonna, and if you're referring to the why this school question, yes. Also think about the patient population. For example, right? If one of the things you're really interested in is working with a Spanish speaking population, that you need to mention that in your University of Miami secondaries because there's a large Spanish speaking population in that area. So if that school caters to a specific patient population, make sure you mention that in your secondaries too. Awesome. Other questions? And we're at the end of the presentation, so you can feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask your question out loud. All right, going once. Oh, there we go. Okay, apologies if you answered this, but is it beneficial to answer optional challenge questions, even if you don't have low grades or scores to explain it? So yeah, I did touch on this earlier. Yes, there are many different challenges that many of you all have been to. It doesn't have to be a low grade or something with your MCAT. It could be a challenge that you overcame in lab. It could be a challenge that you overcame in your personal life, right? As long as it fits the prompt, okay? You want to make sure that whatever you're going to talk about is within the scope of the prompt. So if they're specifically asking about an academic challenge that you've been through and you don't have an academic challenge, you're going to say, thank you so much, but I did not encounter this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, awesome. Bye, Liam. Okay, any other questions? Again, yeah, you're able to mute yourselves or whatever. Okay. Is it appropriate to talk about mental health for prompts like that? So that can be a bit tricky. So I guess I would think about the scope of what you're talking about. If you're talking about your own mental health challenges, I think you just need to be careful in the way that you present it, where you could talk, you may be able to talk about it, but again, you want to spend the majority of your characters talking about how you've been successfully navigating through it. And then also you may be able to touch on these are the resources I'm going to use at your school as I continue to navigate through this, right? That's another way to tie in the why of the school is how I'm going to utilize these resources while I'm in medical school. Carter asks, would you recommend answering the optional prompts? Again, yes, as long as what you're writing fits within the scope of the prompt. If you did not have an academic challenge, you're going to say, I did not encounter this during my time in undergrad. Thank you so much. Right? You don't need to answer it if what you have to talk about doesn't fit within that scope. Okay, more questions. Okay. All right, so we have a few of you left, so I'm going to say going once. Oh, there we go. A question from Craig. Thoughts on ending the why this statement with a generic line about being honored for the opportunity? You probably don't need that, Craig. They know you. They know that you are excited and ready to apply, right? They know you want to be a physician. They know you want to do your medical school training at San Francisco or whatever. You could probably, leave that out. That's something you may put in a thank you note, though. Some schools, they say don't send a thank you note, but if the school, if you're going to send a thank you note, that may be more appropriate for that after an interview. Okay, any other questions? All right, if that is it, I'm gonna end the event here. And thank you all so much for attending. Good luck on your secondaries and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.